Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I moved to Colton looking for peace and quiet, a place to disappear for a while and put my life back together after everything fell apart. My marriage had ended badly. I had lost most of my friends in the divorce, and I needed somewhere far from the memories. Somewhere I could start over. I found something else entirely. I found out what happens when you build a town on top of something that was never meant to be disturbed, and I found out what happens when that something finally gets out. My name is Lyle Pruitt, and 8 months ago, I took a job at the Colton Municipal Water Treatment Facility. It's not glamorous work. I monitor the pumps, check the filtration systems, run the standard tests, file the reports. The kind of job where nothing exciting ever happens, which was exactly what I wanted. After the chaos of my old life, boring sounded perfect. Colton itself is a small town, about 2,000 people, tucked away in a valley surrounded by thick forest. There's one main road in and one main road out. The nearest city is over an hour away. It's the kind of place that doesn't show up on most maps, the kind of place you only find if you're looking for it. I wasn't looking for it. I found the job listing online and applied on a whim. They hired me within a week. I should have wondered why they were so eager to fill the position. I didn't. My co-worker at the plant was a man named Buddy Callahan. He was in his 60s with a round face and a friendly smile, and he'd been working at the facility for over 30 years. He showed me the ropes during my first few weeks, explaining every system and procedure with the patience of someone who genuinely loved his job. Best water in the state, he told me once, filling a glass directly from one of the output pipes. People come from miles around just to fill up bottles. There's something special about it. You can taste the difference. I nodded politely, but I didn't drink from the tap. Old habit from my city days. I had always bought bottled water, never trusted what came out of the pipes. People in Colton gave me strange looks when they saw me with my store-bought bottles, but nobody said anything directly. I rented a small house on the edge of town. It was old but solid, with a front porch that looked out over an empty field. I didn't socialize much. I'd go to work, come home, watch TV, go to sleep. Sometimes I'd drive into town for groceries or to eat at the little diner on Main Street. People were friendly enough, but there was something closed off about them. Polite, but distant. Like they were all part of some club I hadn't been invited to join. For the first few months, everything seemed normal, quiet, exactly what I'd been looking for. Then I started noticing things. It began with the water tests. Part of my job was running daily samples through our analysis equipment, checking for contaminants, making sure everything fell within acceptable parameters. I'd done it hundreds of times. The readings were always the same: clean, safe, perfect. But one morning in early March, something was different. The sample had a faint coloration I'd never seen before. Not quite green, not quite grey. Something in between, like a shadow suspended in the liquid. I held the vial up to the light and watched it swirl slowly, even though I wasn't moving my hand. The readings came back normal, Every metric fell within acceptable ranges, but something felt wrong. The water looked wrong. It moved wrong. I mentioned it to Buddy during our lunch break. "Notice something odd with the morning samples," I said. "Slight discoloration. Probably nothing, but I wanted to flag it." Buddy barely looked up from his sandwich. "Water's been the same for 30 years. Don't worry about it." "I know, but this looked different. Maybe we should run some additional tests just to be safe." I said, "Don't worry about it." His voice was flat, final. He looked at me then, and something in his expression made me drop the subject. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the water, about the way it had moved in the vial. Around 2 in the morning, I got up to get a glass of water, then remembered I was out of bottled. I stood at the kitchen sink for a long moment, looking at the tap, and decided I wasn't that thirsty. I went to the window instead, looking out at the quiet street. That's when I saw my neighbor. He was standing in his backyard, completely still, not doing anything, not looking at anything in particular, just standing there in the darkness, his face tilted up toward the sky. I watched him for 10 minutes. He didn't move once. After that, I started paying closer attention to the people of Colton. The wrongness was subtle at first, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But once I started noticing, I couldn't stop. Groups of people would fall silent at the exact same moment when I walked by, not trailing off naturally, the way conversations do, just stopping, all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. Strangers would smile at me with identical expressions, the same angle of the lips, the same crinkle around the eyes, like they'd all practiced the same smile in front of the same mirror. People moved in synchronization. I'd be walking down Main Street and notice that everyone on the sidewalk scratched their face at the same time, or turned their head in the same direction, or took a drink of water from their bottles at the exact same moment. The water, that was the other thing. Everyone in Colton drank constantly. They carried water bottles everywhere, taking sips every few seconds. The diner refilled glasses before they were even half empty. Children at the park would drink from the fountains for minutes at a time, water streaming down their chins, their eyes distant and unfocused. I realized I'd never seen anyone in town drink anything else. No coffee at the diner, no soda at the gas station, no juice boxes for the kids, just water, always water. From the tap, from the fountains, from the bottles they filled at home. Only water. Buddy started changing around the same time. He'd always been talkative, filling the quiet hours at the plant with stories about his grandkids, about the fish he used to catch in the river, about nothing in particular. But now he barely spoke. He'd just sit at his monitoring station and stare at the screens, taking slow sips from a water bottle that never seemed to empty. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me, not glancing over, looking, staring with an expression I couldn't read, his eyes fixed on me for minutes at a time, without blinking. One afternoon, I walked into the main processing room and found him drinking directly from one of the treatment tanks, not from a cup or a bottle. He had his face pressed against an access valve, water pouring into his mouth, spilling down his shirt, pooling on the floor around his feet. "Buddy, what the hell are you doing?" He pulled back slowly and turned to look at me. Water dripped from his chin. He was smiling. "It tastes better before we clean it," he said. "Purer, closer to the source." I didn't know what to say to that. I backed out of the room and didn't mention it again. That night, I drove to the city and found a laboratory that could run a detailed analysis on water samples. I gave them 3 vials I'd collected from different points in our system and paid extra for rush results. The report came back 5 days later. Most of it was normal, standard mineral content, acceptable levels of chlorine, nothing that would raise any red flags. But there was one anomaly. The water contained trace amounts of an organic compound the lab couldn't identify. The concentration was tiny, barely detectable, but it was definitely there. The lab technician I spoke with on the phone sounded confused. "We've tested thousands of water samples," she said. "Municipal supplies, wells, springs, everything. I've never seen anything like this compound. It appears to be biological in origin, but we can't determine what organism it comes from. It doesn't match anything in our database." "Is it dangerous?" "Based on the concentration levels, it falls within safe parameters. But I honestly don't know. We'd need to do more research to understand what we're dealing with." I thanked her and hung up. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a long time, thinking about everyone in Colton drinking that water. Day after day, year after year. Whatever was in there, it was inside all of them now. I needed to understand what was happening. I started looking into the history of Colton. The town was founded in 1901, built around a mining operation that pulled iron ore from deep underground. For 50 years, the mine was the heart of the community. Hundreds of workers, steady wages, a reason for the town to exist. Then, in 1952, the mine closed suddenly. The official explanation was structural instability, unsafe conditions. The mining company shut everything down, sealed the entrance, and left. But I found old newspaper articles that told a different story. References to an incident in March of that year, mentions of emergency procedures and quarantine protocols, a story about miners being hospitalized with an unknown illness, another story about families leaving town in the middle of the night, abandoning everything they owned. Something had happened in that mine, something bad enough to shut down the entire operation overnight, and nobody wanted to talk about it. I found Nora Vance through the Colton Historical Society, which turned out to be a fancy name for a collection of old documents stored in the back room of her house. She was in her 80s, thin and sharp-eyed, with a voice like dry leaves rustling. She seemed surprised when I knocked on her door, surprised that anyone was asking about the mine. "Most folks around here don't like to remember," she said, leading me into her cluttered living room. "It's been 70 years. Everyone who was there is dead or gone. Easier to pretend it never happened." "What did happen?" Nora lowered herself into an armchair and studied me for a long moment. "You're the new man at the water plant, the one who doesn't drink from the tap." I didn't ask how she knew that. "Yes." "Smart. I don't drink it either. Haven't for 60 years. She gestured toward her kitchen, where I could see rows of containers lined up on the counter. "I collect rainwater, boil it twice before I use it. People think I'm crazy. Maybe I am, but I'm still myself, which is more than I can say for most of this town." "What happened at the mine, Nora?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she started talking. March of 1952. Miners broke through into an underground cavern. Biggest one anyone had ever seen. The foreman said you could fit a cathedral inside it. And at the bottom of the cavern was a lake. Water so deep they dropped weighted lines for hundreds of feet and never hit bottom. An underground lake. That's what they called it. But it wasn't like any lake you've ever seen. The water was dark, not dirty, just dark, like looking into nothing. And it moved wrong. Little ripples and currents, even though there was no wind down there, like something was stirring it from below. I thought about the sample I'd held up to the light, the way it had swirled in the vial without me moving it. The miners who first went into that cavern came back different, Nora continued. Quiet, distant, couldn't stop drinking water. Within a week, they were finishing each other's sentences, moving in coordination, thinking the same thoughts at the same time. She paused. My father was one of them. What happened to him? He died. They all did, eventually. The ones who'd been exposed. Some of them lasted a few years, some only a few months. But they all died wrong. Drowning on dry land, the doctor said. Lungs full of water that came from nowhere. I felt cold despite the warmth of the room. And the mine. The company sealed it, poured concrete into the entrance, filled the whole thing in as best they could. Official story was structural instability, like you said. But the real reason was to keep that thing contained. The thing in the water. What thing? Nora shook her head slowly. Nobody knows. Something old. Something that was down there long before there were people to find it. Long before there was anything at all, maybe. It lived in that water. Maybe it was the water, and it wanted out. But the seal held for 70 years. Seals don't last forever. Nora leaned forward in her chair. The aquifer that feeds this town runs deep, deep enough to touch that cavern. I've been watching for decades, waiting for signs. The way people have been acting lately, the way they drink, the way they move together. She looked at me with something like pity. The seal is failing. That thing is in the water supply now. It's been seeping in for years, and it's in everyone except me and you. I drove home in a daze, Nora's words echoing in my head. I thought about Buddy drinking from the treatment tank, about my neighbor standing motionless in the darkness, about the whole town moving in unison, drinking in unison, thinking in unison. 2,000 people, all contaminated, all becoming part of something I couldn't understand. I tried to report it. I called the state health department, the EPA, anyone I could think of. I described the contamination, the strange compound, the behavioral changes in the population. People listened politely, took notes, promised to look into it. Nobody ever called back. I drove to the county seat 3 days later to report it in person. The official I met with was a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit who smiled too much and nodded along with everything I said. "This is very concerning," he said when I finished. "We take water safety very seriously. Let me get you some documentation to fill out." He left the room and came back with a stack of forms and a glass of water. "You must be thirsty after that long drive," he said, setting the glass in front of me. "Please, help yourself." I looked at the glass, looked at his smile, looked at the way his eyes didn't quite match his expression. "No, thank you." His smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes shifted, focused. The same look I'd seen from Buddy, from my neighbor, from everyone in Colton. "Suit yourself," he said, and he picked up the glass and drained it in one long swallow. I left the forms on his desk and drove back to Colton. The contamination had already spread beyond the town. How far, I didn't know, but it was spreading, one sip at a time. That night, Buddy came to my house. I saw him through the window, standing on my front porch. Not knocking, not calling out, just standing there, facing my door, motionless as a statue. I didn't open the door. I sat in my living room with all the lights off and watched him through a gap in the curtains. He stood there for 6 hours. He didn't move once. When the sun started coming up, he simply turned around and walked away. The next day, I drove to the old mine entrance on the edge of town. The concrete seal was still there, a massive grey slab covering what used to be the main shaft. But it was cracked. Deep fissures ran through the surface and dark water seeped through the gaps, not flowing downward like water should, flowing outwards, spreading across the ground in thin tendrils, soaking into the earth. The vegetation around the seal had grown thick and strange. Plants I didn't recognize, with leaves that were too dark and stems that glistened with moisture. Everything was wet. The air itself felt damp, heavy with humidity that shouldn't exist on a cool spring day. I got close enough to touch the concrete, and that's when I felt it. A pressure in my head, not painful, but wrong, like something vast and cold was turning its attention toward me, noticing me, considering me. I could feel it in the water seeping through the cracks, in the moisture in the air, in the damp ground beneath my feet. It was everywhere, it was aware, and it was very, very old. I ran back to my truck. In the rearview mirror, I saw figures emerging from the tree line, dozens of them, the townspeople, moving in perfect unison, walking toward the mine. That night, I watched from my window as the entire town walked past my house. Men, women, children, old and young, all moving in the same direction, taking the same steps at the same time, perfectly silent, perfectly synchronized. Their faces were blank, but their eyes were bright with something that might have been anticipation. They were going to the mine, to the seal, to the water. I heard it as they walked, a sound in the distance rising from the direction of the old shaft. Not quite voices, not quite water, something between, a chorus of whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The seal was opening, not breaking from the pressure, being opened. The town was letting it out. I should have run right then, packed my truck and driven until I ran out of gas. But I was frozen at my window, watching the procession pass by, listening to that sound grow louder, wetter, more eager. By morning, the streets were empty. Everyone was gone. I was alone in a town that had swallowed itself. I packed everything I could fit into my truck. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get out. The main road out of town was blocked. Cars and trucks sat abandoned in the middle of the asphalt, doors hanging open, engines still running. No drivers, no passengers, just empty vehicles lined up like they'd all stopped at the same moment. I tried the back roads. Everyone led me in circles. I'd drive for 20 minutes and end up back at the center of town, looking at the same buildings, the same empty streets, the same morning light filtering through clouds that hadn't moved. The forest seemed to shift around me. Landmarks I recognized were suddenly in the wrong places. Roads that should have led out of the valley curved back on themselves. It was like the land itself was confused, or like something was deliberately keeping me inside. I ended up at the mine. I don't know how. I was driving away from it, I'm certain of that. But the road twisted, and the trees pressed in, and suddenly, I was there, parked in front of where the seal used to be. It was gone. The concrete had been pulled away, chunk by chunk, and piled neatly on either side of the entrance. The shaft yawned open, a black mouth in the earth, and from deep inside, I could hear water. Moving, rising, the townspeople stood in neat rows facing the entrance. Hundreds of them. Silent, motionless, waiting. Then it started coming out. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't a creature. It didn't have a shape. It was just water. Dark water that moved with purpose, that flowed against gravity, that spread across the ground like something alive. It poured from the mine entrance in a slow wave, pooling around the feet of the people standing nearest to the shaft. They didn't move. They didn't run. They smiled as it touched them, as it climbed their legs, their torsos, their necks. One by one, they walked forward into the dark water. It swallowed them without a sound, without a ripple. They simply stepped in and were gone, absorbed into something vast and ancient and endlessly patient. I watched Buddy walk into the water. I watched Nora's neighbors, the man from the diner, the children from the park. I watched the whole town feed itself to the thing that had been waiting beneath them for 70 years. And then it turned its attention to me. I felt it like a weight in my chest, a cold, alien curiosity. It had noticed me standing there, the one who hadn't drunk the water, the one who wasn't part of the plan. It reached toward me, not physically, but I felt it reaching all the same, touching the edges of my thoughts, tasting what I was. I ran. I got in my truck and I drove. I didn't look at the road. I didn't look at the rear view mirror. I just pressed the accelerator to the floor and drove until the trees fell away and the valley was behind me and the sky opened up and I could breathe again. I made it out. I don't know how. Maybe it let me go. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Or maybe it wanted me to escape, to spread the word, to warn people about what was coming, because it is coming. I'm writing this from a motel room 400 miles from Colton. I only drink bottled water now, sealed bottles from brands I've researched, sourced from places as far from that valley as possible. I shower as quickly as I can, and I keep my mouth closed when I do it. I flinch when it rains. Water flows everywhere. That's what I keep thinking about. Rivers feed into lakes. Lakes feed into oceans. Groundwater moves in ways we can't even track. Rain falls from clouds that formed over places we'll never know. If that thing is in the water, it can spread anywhere. It can reach anyone. All it needs is time and patience. And I got the impression it has plenty of both. I think about the official I met in the county seat, about the smile that didn't reach his eyes, about the way he drank that glass of water so eagerly. The contamination was already spreading before the seal broke. How many other towns, how many other cities, how many people have been sipping it down for years without knowing what they were drinking? I don't know what that thing is. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what it wants beyond spreading, consuming, absorbing everything it touches into itself. But I know it was never meant to escape. And now it has. So this is my warning. Be careful what you drink. Watch the people around you. Notice if they start acting strange, moving the same way, saying the same things, drinking constantly, endlessly, like they can never quite get enough. Check your water. Check your neighbors. Check yourself. And if you start to feel something in the back of your mind, a coldness, a pressure, a vast and patient attention turning toward you, stop drinking. Stop drinking and run. It probably won't help, but at least you'll die as yourself. That's more than most people are going to get. The author of this post has not responded to any messages since its publication 3 weeks ago. The town of Colton, when searched on various mapping services, appears to have been removed from all official records. Satellite imagery of the valley where the town supposedly existed shows only dense forest and an unusually large lake that does not appear on any historical survey. Local water authorities in the surrounding region have reported a significant increase in requests for independent water testing. Most results have come back normal. Most. In unrelated news, residents in several neighboring counties have reported a sudden increase in water consumption. Health officials have attributed this to an unusually warm spring and encouraged citizens to stay hydrated. The tap water, they assure everyone, is perfectly safe to drink.